Hello, today I would like to go over a really fun activity you can utilize with your alternately assessed students when you're working on the Math Essential Element 4 MD2.B, which is measuring mass or volume using standard tools. So the activity that I want to talk about today is using recipes to either bake or cook and learn about measurements. So it's a very functional skill that a lot of our students definitely need. A lot of our students have also been doing this at home a lot lately with their parents, but talk to the parents, see if that's what they're doing, see what they're helping them out cooking or making at home, and maybe you can utilize that in one of your lessons to go over actual measurements. So let's go through an activity that I like to utilize when we're working on measurements with my students. And so we talk about the whole recipe, right? So I found this very simple recipe online through All Recipes, and you can see it was chunked into the ingredients as most recipes are, and then the directions. I found something that was very simple, only 3 very easy steps to follow and not a huge list of ingredients. But meet your students where they're at. If they're able to handle more, great. If they can't, that's fine. You can find something very simple like this. You can have your students read this if that's where they're able to read. If that's at their reading level, go for it. That's awesome. Have them look for a recipe online and then use it. A lot of our students, though, are not ready for that. So I'm going to show you some different ways that I utilized BoardMaker. And I went through and I talked about all the ingredients. So I went in and I kind of chunked it out into 2 steps that we talked about, your list of ingredients, and then we go through the steps. So we're focusing on our ingredients, right? Because we're talking about measurement. So let's go in, let's talk about what we see. What are some ingredients that we need for our recipe? Can we leave out any of these ingredients? Can we add any extra ingredients, right? So a lot of ways to build conversation with your students, having them turn and talk, ask their partner what ingredients they need, or is that ingredient listed, right? You can go through, you can have them circle, you can have them go through and underline, right? As you're talking about all those different things. If your students are ready to write out the list after they just saw it, or if you want to see if how many they can recall, you can embed a lined piece of paper and your students can write or type it in if that's where they're at, right? So some ways to increase rigor or to think about as you're moving through your lessons, if you want your students to be able to start listing out the different ingredients that they need. Now, another thing you can do is you can make your little ingredients card much smaller, and then you can have, like I said, you can have students circle, they can underline the word, or at the same time, if you want to have all your students participating on one slide, you can just shrink this so that your students who need to circle, they can do that, they can underline, or your students who are capable of writing, they can use this, the pen, the marker, or they can use their text box, right? So they can type in eggs, or maybe you want them to circle the sugar, and they can do that, right? So tons of different options to get a lot of student engagement, all at students' different levels, right? So it's a ton of differentiated options here if you just shrink that little task card down a bit and have your students respond the way that they're able to show you. So now I'm going to show you a quick little activity that I like to do also where they're identifying what ingredients we just talked about. So what are the ingredients again of the recipe? So I just am showing you some different ways of color coding. Here I highlighted just the boxes or just the icons, only the borders. And here I highlighted the whole thing, right? So what you can do is you can increase or decrease your field of answers over here, right? And you can have them drag and drop the materials or the ingredients that they need, or you can have them circle it. And if your students are writers, you have plenty of room down here for them to write or type in the answers of what it is that they need. Another thing is I added some distractors. You don't need as many distractors. You can minimize the distractors if that's needed. But they can also cross out the distractors if that's not the one. So milk's not in our ingredients list. We might want some milk later, but that's not going to go in our brownies, right? Peanut butter sounds delicious in brownies, but that's not what this recipe calls for. And watermelon's a healthy alternative, but we're making brownies today, right? So you can go through and talk about those things. You can X them out. But I just wanted to show you, you can make a really fun matching activity. They can drag and drop the flour, right? If you wanted to, okay, which one goes here? Yep, we definitely need the flour. We definitely need the eggs, and we definitely need the salt, right? Again, if they can't do all 3, you can do one at a time, and then you can have them go in, and then they can X out what it is they don't need, right? So no milk, no peanut butter, and no watermelon. So just a fun activity, again, to reinforce that they're following the list of ingredients. You can make this as engaging as you want, as fun as you want. You can have them, like I said, only have the borders highlighted, the whole icon can be highlighted. They can match by dragging and dropping. If it was in a list, they can draw a line to it to identify each one, or they can type in or write in their answers down below. So now that we know all of our ingredients, we did a little activity about our ingredients, let's go in and talk about identifying the measurements of each ingredient. So here I'm going to show you, you can either do one ingredient per page, and as we'll go through, I'll show you how you can increase that and you can increase some rigor. But here I have my option, right, where they can draw a line to the correct one, or X out, right, the incorrect one, or circle just the correct one. If your students can circle it and then write in the number 2, fantastic. If they can type it in, great. Whatever works for your students. But now you want them to start identifying, based on our recipe, how much, what is the measurement of each ingredient. So here we have a very simple activity. Like I said, you can have one ingredient per page if that's where your students are at, or they're just learning about recipes and measurement. Start here, right? Make sure that they're successful. Give them an errorless way to learn, right? Something else you can do is you can provide that support if they need it, right? You can highlight that icon so that they know exactly what it is. You provide that support for them, and then they can, draw a line to it. They can drag and drop it if that's, what they're capable of doing, so that we know we have the correct measurement. Then they can write it out if they're ready. Wherever they're at, you can get them to do as much as they can do. And you can provide as much support as you need, right? If your students don't need a distractor, take it out, right? Just delete it. Go right up here, delete, done. They don't even need it. We just want them to focus on what it is we do need. And there you go, right? So very simple. Just undo that so they have it back there. All right. Now here, again, you can increase that rigor by having 2 different ingredients. So we know we need 2 cups of sugar and 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So drag and drop the correct measurement to the correct item. Draw a line to the correct measurement for the correct ingredient, right? Whatever works, they can drag and drop, and then they can also go in, and like I said, if they're capable of writing, they can do that too. So you can continue to increase your rigor by having them just write out the answers, type out the answers if they're ready. You can start increasing the amount of icons and ingredients that you have here, right? You can keep going. If they're able to do 3, great. We're identifying the measurements. Here we have an example of 4 different ingredients, right? So you can keep going through the entire recipe and have as many ingredients as your students are capable of identifying the measurements of, right? Once you get to here, you might even want to talk about, what's the difference? Which one is more? Are 2 cups bigger than 1.5 cups? Is a half a cup bigger or smaller, right? So you want to go through and you can start talking about it as you progress through your unit, and they learn more about what that means, how much that means. Is 2 bigger than 1? Go back and forth and talk about those things. And that's something you might want to work towards. So maybe, you start where we're only doing 1 or 2 different ingredients and their measurement, and we want to work up to all the ingredients. So definitely tons of ways to build rigor throughout your lesson. And then we have our adapted directions, because the other part of our directions, now that we have all those ingredients, what are we going to do with them? We have our correct measurement. Now here are the steps we're going to follow. So again, if your students aren't able to read that recipe that we had back in the beginning, here is an example of a Boardmaker adapted directions that you can have your students read through. It supports your AAC learners. And then you'll see in step 2 is where we have all those different ingredients, and we know all those measurements because we just went over it. So I hope you find this fun. I hope your students can utilize this and you find this a fun way to work on recipes and measurements with your students.